1979, a deputy sheriff was on patrol outside the small community of Stephen, Minnesota. Around 2 o'clock a.m., the deputy noticed a bright object hovering above the road and decided to investigate. A UFO suddenly rocketed straight at his patrol car, killing the engine. The last thing Johnson remembered was light all around him and the sound of glass shattering. When he woke up, the strange object was gone, and he was blind and bruised, but able to radio for help. Fellow policemen soon arrived and found Johnson's 1977 Ford worse off than he was. The windshield was splintered and smashed. There were dents in the hood, and both the headlight and the roof beacon were wrecked. The car's 2 radio antennae were bent, respectively at 45 and 90-degree angles. Johnson also stated that the car's clock and his wristwatch both stopped for 14 minutes, and that he had blacked out for 39 minutes. The doctor who examined Johnson described his sight injury as similar to welder burns caused by extreme exposure to UV light. Thankfully, he eventually recovered his vision, and the patrol car now stands in a museum in the Minnesota town of Warren. In January 1948, Captain Thomas Mantle was leading a squadron of 4 F-51 Mustangs to an airfield in northern Kentucky, unaware that a giant cone-shaped object in the air was already freaking out civilians, military, and highway patrols. The mysterious craft gave witnesses the impression of being reflective and at least 300 feet in diameter. Since they were incidentally in the right airspace, a tower operator requested that Mantle investigate. The Mustangs climbed in altitude to reach their target, but at 22,000 feet, low fuel or oxygen forced all the other pilots to return to base. Alone, Mantle continued ascending and radioed his last message, saying that he saw the object directly ahead and that he was going to give the chase another 10 minutes. But shortly afterward, a horrified local watched Mantle's plane circle 3 times before it dove out of the sky and exploded about halfway to the ground. The extreme fringe believed that Mantle had been shot down by an extraterrestrial force. The director of Project Grudge blamed the incident on the Skyhook balloon. The U.S. Navy was secretly developing the Skyhook, a massive ice cream cone-shaped balloon made out of reflective aluminum. None of the witnesses had heard about or seen Skyhook before. According to Ruppelt's sources, several of them were launched about 150 miles away on the same day as the Mantle UFO. While Ruppelt couldn't locate the flight records that would have proved his theory, he was satisfied that the wind patterns for January 7th would have taken the Skyhook into the locations of the reported sightings. In December 1980, John Burroughs was one of the first airmen on the scene at the alleged landing site in Rendlesham Forest, a touchdown that would later become Britain's flagship UFO mystery. During the encounter, some of the men were said to have touched the conical craft, but the group eventually fled the forest when some of them started falling into a trance-like state and had to be physically dragged away from the object. Burroughs believed that his proximity to the craft that night had exposed him to something deadly, possibly radiation, which later caused severe heart problems and other health complaints. For years, he fought for disability compensation from the Department of Veterans Affairs, bravely sticking to his story that a spaceship had made him sick. He also produced Project Condign as evidence, a declassified British study that sidelined UFOs as a little understood form of weather plasma called Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, or UAP. Even Condign concluded that it was conceivable that the Rendlesham witnesses had been exposed to radiation, albeit from UAP. What helped sway the VA's final decision in Burroughs' favor were his service medical records, which could be viewed by the agency but not Burroughs. Based on these documents and others, Burroughs was finally awarded full disability and some acknowledgement that his bad health had really been caused by a close encounter. In 1980, an Australian farm worker named George Blackwell was roused from his sleep at about 1 a.m. by frantic farm animals bellowing and galloping and an unearthly whistling sound. Checking to see what was going on, he was astonished to see cattle trying to escape, a double-domed object hovering about 10 feet above the ground. The craft appeared to be checking a shed, a hedge, a silo, and finally a water tank, whistling loudly all the way. The open water tank seemed to hold the object's attention for a while before it finally settled on the ground. Blackwell approached the object on his motorbike, but was forced to stop 50 feet away due to the ear-splitting whistling. He estimated its height to be about 15 feet and the diameter to be 26 feet. The surface was dotted with orange and blue lights that might have been round windows. But the weirdest feature was a moving black tube which inflated to a size bigger than the UFO itself. When the craft took off, apparently with the 10,000 gallons of water later discovered missing, the creepy tube shrank back into the middle of the object's base. For a long time, the cattle avoided the black ring marking the landing site, and for more than a week, the headache-plagued Blackwell suffered from diarrhea and couldn't hold much food down. For days after the sighting, his wristwatch would only tick when he wasn't wearing it. A mass witness sighting allegedly took place in December 1965 and ended when something plowed in the earth at Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. A meteor-like object blazed through Ontario, Canada, and 6 U.S. states, dropping debris and leaving sonic booms and field fires in its wake. Thousands saw it in the sky and later read in the newspapers that it was just that, a meteor. But there are those who believe it fell in the woods at Kecksburg and that it was a car-sized object shaped like an acorn. Unearthly symbols were written on it, something close to Egyptian hieroglyphs. Witnesses insisted that it attracted a heavy military presence. However, the U.S. Army said they found nothing. Yet years later, amid pressure to release the truth about the incident, NASA admitted that they'd examined debris from the site and found that it had been a Russian satellite. When ordered by a judge to produce the documentation of their findings, NASA seemed to have misplaced it. The only Soviet candidate that remotely fit was Cosmos 96, an acorn-shaped satellite which wasn't nearly as big as the Kecksburg object. Even NASA's chief scientist for orbital debris, Nicholas Johnson, stated that Cosmos had nothing to do with the fireball sightings or the crash. U.S. Space Command also reported that Cosmos crashed in Canada 13 hours before the sightings started. In 2003, scientists discovered topless trees leading toward the spot where the object was reportedly found. The damage was dated to the year of the crash. While one scientist felt that ice was probably responsible, it's plausible that an incoming object could have sheared the trees as it crashed through them.